70 strategically important countries worldwide. One of those countries is Kenya. Now, Freedom House conducted a governance assessment on Kenya that focused on politically significant developments since 2013, when the country held its very first elections under the 2010 Constitution. Now, to help us understand this report and what exactly it means for us here in Kenya, we do have Roland Ebole, Program Officer from Freedom House East Africa. Karibu sana.
Thank you very much.
And we have Professor Peter Kagwanja, Chief Executive of the Africa Policy Institute and, of course, a former government advisor. Good morning, gentlemen. Now, we're looking at a 23-page document here. 23 pages long, and of course basically outlining what has been happening since basically Uhuru Kenyatta and his deputy William Ruto took over the governance of this country, of course under the 2010 Constitution. And so many things have been captured in this report. We're talking about civic space, security and human rights, rule of law and independence of the judiciary, corruption and accountability. And it may be argued that this, we'll start with you, Ebole, this coming in an election year, because it basically is fodder for probably people who would want to accuse the incumbent. Coming in an election year, that such a report could be suspect. Is it?
I wouldn't say so. We had a similar report as Freedom House in 2012 about assessing governance in Kenya. And this report, looking at the last 3 or 4 years since 2013, again looks at the implementation of the Constitution, since it is it's the period at which we've had the Constitution implemented with devolved governance taking shape in Kenya. But even above all, it's a time when we are running to the next election, 2013, and it's a very important time to just discuss all the governance issues. So it is not really timed to be at any cost political. I would say its timing is not suspect.
Yes, but of course giving a report on any government's performance on election year, unless you're coming from the opposition, it definitely means something for the incumbent.
It does, but this time round I think is the reverse, because this report by Freedom House and a parallel report done by Mo Ibrahim Foundation, which is African Governance Index, seems to indicate generally that there's a huge improvement on a number of fronts or indices that Kenya has made giant steps since 2013. Therefore, even though it highlights a number of areas that would need improvement upon, overall, it is giving Kenya a positive grade. Maybe not an A asterisk, but maybe an A or A minus.
Okay, and we'll get to that point where we'll grade the government's performance, because this report does not. You say it is actually showing improvement, but I'm not so sure. When it comes to civic space, say political and bureaucratic corruption and regular state overreach prevent the full promise of Kenya's legal and institution framework from being realized. That is just one. The second one, they're saying Kenya's democracy is substantially impaired by persistent and serious abuses by the security services, often justified in the context of combating crime and terrorism. That's the second one. Kenya's judiciary is robust. However, bureaucratic and political obstacles prevent the judiciary from consistently asserting its authority. Another one, Kenya continues to struggle with significant political and bureaucratic corruption. Now, you said there's an improvement.
I read the report itself. I know this is the distillation of the total, and I read it against the report by Mo Ibrahim, which is more detailed in terms of the questions. Look at 95 indicators and over 10 years. So it's more authoritative, I would guess, at that level. Freedom House report is more focused on Kenya, which basically raises a question you've raised, why now? And of course they had another one in 2012, as Bore has indicated. But looking at the reports beyond the sensational bait, they seems to be favorable this year than they were possibly in 2012. Of course, they are indicating that, and justifiably, that the area of corruption, area of public safety need to be looked into. Reports are generally aimed at helping countries, not just Kenya, correct themselves. So they're not just, a kind of a soothsaying or, massaging. No, that's not what reports are all about. They are about pointing to you the areas that need improvement. Of course, the politicization of the same can cause a lot of harm. Yes. Now, reports also have their shortcomings. Take, for example, we've just been talking about the methodology of this particular report. The methodology is not very clear about what exactly, it's clear about the question they asked, but the question themselves point to a specific bias, and the bias is bureaucratic. How, for example, do you get into a scientific report information that the opposition as well as government have been involved or cited in allegations relating to corruption? How then do you get the culprits, for example, involvement in the same? So methodologically, most of these reports really are short. Yes, and Bonabole is here, so you can actually explain his concern. How did you arrive at this report?
One, Freedom House has developed its methodological questions, and these questions have been used within all the assessments that have been done in these 70 over countries in the world. And so the methodological questions would look at 4 thematic areas specifically, look at civic space, and the questions that would be asked in as far as civic space is concerned are questions that would elicit a reaction from the respondents in as far as how has the environment been for non-state actors, for instance, how free have they been to really exercise their freedom of speech, expression, association, assembly, and so many other questions. There are also questions with regards to the rule of law and the judiciary. There are also questions with regards to corruption and accountability. There are also questions with regards to issues to do with I said rule of law, I said civic space, I said corruption and accountability. And within our questions, we would send interviews, the questionnaires to the government themselves. So government would respond to some of these questions, would send the questionnaires to private sector to respond to this question, would send to civil society organization, and would also send to other think tanks such as the Institute of Economic Affairs. So at the end of the day, when they respond to us, we get to sit down and analyze, so that we do not just take a no and elaboration for the word as it has been written, but we go through it, and maybe we may follow up with calls for elaborations, especially for those maybe who give a very closed kind of ended responses, like yes, there has not been free space for non-governmental organizations to exercise their thoughts and all that. So that has been the approach in as far as...
Yes. I don't know if that answer satisfies you.
Now, first and foremost, we have to acknowledge that Freedom House, like all these other projects, are work in progress. They have 2 forms of biases which they have to overcome. The first is that they are still stuck in the state-centric analysis of societies, particularly emerging societies. So looking at all the questions that Freedom House is asking, they are targeted to bureaucrats, the bureaucrats. And this country is actually not driven by bureaucrats. Bureaucrats on the receiving end from 2010, if you look at it. You've seen President Kenyatta pushing that we don't have to have, the government pushing that we don't have to have a Kamukunji. I mean, the opposition is not going to hold a rally in Uhuru Park when we are in a Fraha then the court quashes that. And who leads to that? It's an individual citizen who goes there. So how methodologically are we going to capture the action of the ordinary Kenyan who is shaping his or her society? That's the first bias. The second bias you find in this analysis by Western, Washington, London, Paris-based analysts is that they are culturally biased. I looked at the map within Freedom House about the geography of freedom, as I would call it. And you find the US, the whole of Western Europe, Australia, and others are shaded green because they are the total freedom. Of course, Kenya is listed as partial freedom. And then a country like Swaziland, Ethiopia, and others are cited as no freedom. So they have those three gradations. And one wonder, in terms of freedom and safety or security, should France be within the green shade?
Yes.
Given the insecurity that the French have faced in the last two years. The number of deaths from terrorism by French themselves in this country, in this year or last year, way supersede what has happened either in Kenya or Zimbabwe. The same can be said of the US, even as we are speaking now.
Yes.
A young man picks a gun and shoots the colleagues, fellow children. The other time we have police shooting of blacks, racial profiling and all that. Why is there this, what you can call Afro bias, bias against Africa? So I think this Freedom House and other, white knights of freedom globally need to really
white knights. Perhaps is this the opportunity to explain where Freedom House comes from, how it was formed, and how much of the East African chapter of Freedom House has to do with this report as opposed to the American establishment?
I would want us to forget Freedom House. I would want us to reason as Kenyans here.
But you know, as Kenyans, we are known to dismiss every survey or report that does not seem to support us. And so we will treat this 23-page report in the same manner unless you actually convince us that, yes.
I totally understand, but let's forget Freedom House at the moment. I wrote this report. I'm a Kenyan. We are all Kenyans. I wrote this report. And this report covers issues.
So is it a Freedom House report or a Bore's report?
It's Ebola writing a report as a staff of Freedom House.
This is a legal question. Is it an Ebola report or a Freedom House report?
It is a Freedom House report written by a Kenyan.
Thank you.
We are all Kenyans here.
Yes.
And these issues that Kenyans are discussing, are Kenyans not discussing corruption and accountability? Are Kenyans not discussing NYS scandal? Are Kenyans not discussing the National Youth Enterprise Fund scandal? Are Kenyans not discussing Chicken Gate?
Yes.
Are Kenyans not discussing Eurobond? Talk about security and human rights. Issues of police brutality, extrajudicial killings. Just as soon as yesterday, the weekend, IPOA and the Nation TV released a finding of increased number of deaths at the hand of Kenya police. Extrajudicial killing increasing. Are Kenyans not discussing security and human rights? Talk about issues of judicial independence. Are Kenyans, we are in a process whereby we are we have a Chief Justice nominee. We are getting into a process whereby we are interviewing a Deputy Chief Justice. Is it not an issue? Even just a few weeks ago, we had the decision about Justice Mutava out. Are Kenyans not talking about corruption in the judiciary? Are Kenyans not talking about issues maybe to do with elections, IEBC? So we are at that period whereby these are issues that are
that's what this is true. Those are issues, and they will be. I mean, issues like those are as old as the world. As old as the hills. The question is the difference an organization like Freedom House make in deepening debate and understanding of these issues. Take, for example, the question about corruption.
Yes.
Trump is facing a scandal.
Yes.
Tony Blair has had issues mentioned about the scandal. Clinton, they are trying to see whether she has issues and so on. Corruption, and during the South African election from Mbeki to Zuma, Zuma was facing a big arms scandal and so on. Corruption is from time to time becomes an instrument for election time, and it's highlighted as we come closer to the election. So let's keep that in mind.
Are you suggesting that probably they should not have done this report because corruption happens everywhere else?
No. That's not the point. The point is that every society deals with this issue. If corruption is condoned by the society and there's nothing done about it, that is a conclusion you make, that nothing is being done or nothing sufficient is being done. In this report and a few other reports, one of the things that then come out is how much effort has been put to deal with the problem of corruption. Therefore, when you talk about bureaucratic corruption, then Kenya has moved a step further beyond what this report acknowledges to deal with the root causes of corruption, which is corporate and it's also deeply entrenched in society. Now, diseases will always be there. The question is whether you are looking for the right therapy and you are determined to do that. And therefore, condemning people because they are sick, it doesn't help anybody.
So that we dispel the notion that this report could be a direct indictment on the government. Could it be that just like we're experiencing with the county governments for the very first time, there are loopholes here and there, and Uhuru Kenyatta and Deputy William Ruto's term, you could say they are the first regime that came under the 2010 constitution and started with it, because Mwai Kibaki, the new constitution just came mid his term. Are you saying that the current government is having trouble? Of course there's progress, but they're having trouble in actually implementing what the constitution wants.
No, I don't think so. The society has become more open. We're more democratic, not because the government wants us to be more open and more democratic, but because social media and other instruments of communication has opened the world for everyone. Two, when you look at the leadership, there is more separation of powers, that Parliament can investigate executive and vice versa. And the new constitution gives an environment of a more democratic space. That is why I was citing Mo Ibrahim Governance Index, because it's ruling on Kenya. It ranks Kenya number 12 in the world out of 156, and indicate Kenya has greatly improved. Of course, they concur with the Freedom House that you need to look at issues of corruption. You need to look at issues of security. But they also, it's also widely acknowledged that security is globally. There are more insecure countries than Kenya, given that the world has become more insecure now than it has ever been before. If you look at the whole of Libya, is cited as one of the most insecure. Before 2011, it was not. So there are also other issues intervening. But the main point one is making is that you cannot tell Freedom House not to do their reports. You cannot tell International Crisis Group not to do their reports. The only thing you can ask them is to be methodologically rigorous and scientific, and not to stoop to the laws of the biases of Kenya's political classes, the partisan classes. What Ebole is doing here, speaking like he's in the accord for coalition, and I'm struggling.
I love you defend you from that accusation.
No, I'm not accusing you.
Because of time, and my director informs me you have to wrap up this discussion. This report, it's accessible to the public, the general public.
Yes, at our website. That is Freedom House, www.freedomhouse.org, and the methodology is also accessible there. But also, just to make a quick point, is that Freedom House has assessed US of A itself, and has also found wanting, has also had findings that are wanting, especially to do with the gun violence, especially to do with also police use of violence against black citizens, and more so such kind of findings.
Is the United States among the 70 that the 70 countries?
But why is it green? Why is US
because when, and this I would refer you to also the Freedom of the World reports and how the methodology is. Free does not mean that it's without an iota of any kind of blemish. It just means that they have got most of them.
But all these reports are accessible from your website. Okay. So as we finalize everything you were to rank Kenya, according to this report, because I understand you've read the whole 23 pages, Kenya's performance in terms of governance, you give it an A or A+?
I would give it an A- now,
yes,
because we still have struggles to implement our constitution.
You wrote this report. What would you give us?
I would give it a C+. There's a lot of good things,
yes,
but there are still things that are restrictive and are pulling us behind C+.
Okay. Gentlemen, thank you so much. That's Roland Ebole, Program Officer, Freedom House, East Africa, and Professor Peter Kagwanja, Chief Executive of the Africa Policy Institute and a former government advisor. You still speak for the government? No, you don't. You just advise the government.
No, and, not now.
Not now.
Not now.
But it could happen even in future.
My other life.
Yes. Of course, you're discussing the state of government.